So the first is the personal mastery. And I remember a CEO of a large pharmaceutical firm who did a leadership program for us always used to say, make sure you are fit, make sure you're exercising, make sure you're eating well, make sure you're getting enough sleep. If some of my team are listening, they may be smirking a little right now. But, make sure that mentally and physically, when these things hit, you've got some buffer, you've got some rope personally in your self-management to give you the space to be able to think and work differently. The second is, don't carry this alone. Even if your Exco team are kicking and screaming, make them share the burden with you and make sense of it as a team. Also, I immediately started to look in my little black book for who were the people that I had worked with that would be able to bring the skills into the organization that we needed right now. I brought an old consultant friend who used to work with me. I knew she would do this at a good rate, and she has been doing thinking styles with the team. She's brought in lean business model canvas. So those members of the team that haven't had executive education, we're getting them very quickly up to speed on the language of how we need to work together in order to do very quick iterations of models, because there isn't the time to have long testing periods. So these are just some of the immediate things. It's your personal management, and then it's pulling in from your network who's going to bring in the resources to help your team through this. I don't know that you can do this alone. My sense of the scale and nature of the crisis is it has impacted every single business in your ecosystem. This isn't an individual firm crisis. This is a crisis that is impacting entire industries and economies. So the network that you need to pull in to react and deal with it has to be from the crowd. So I think those are just some of the immediate practical things that you can do. We have also put in, I know these are soft things, but they matter. We've understood that people are very anxious, and so we've put in a mandatory lunch break. So you've got to take time in the middle of the day to step away. You're not allowed to set up meetings in that time. It gives you time to connect with your family. It gives you time to catch up on just breathing, because a lot of people have stopped breathing through their meetings. And we find that we're just going from because you're sitting at your laptop, people just have this automatic sense of your availability. So thinking and breathing time has been reduced. And I think those are ways in which if you've got to switch to building fast in a virtual space, you've still got to think about the human beings that have to work on this. And be patient with yourself, because I have been sharper and harder with some of my team members than I've ever been. But it's because my anxiety. So always be honest with them. My anxiety is at level 10. And these are some of the manifestations. And I think as long as you keep those communication channels open, and there's so much online that helps us think about how we interact in a virtual world. But bring in the resources that you need. And there are ways to do this frugally. We certainly aren't throwing money at a time when we can't afford it, but there are a lot of people out there who are willing to help and do this at a reduced rate.
I think there's a wonderful question that has come through as part of our discussion, and it links very nicely to what you've said. One of our participants raised the question around how do we create a safe space for teams to be successful and to evolve through this process. It talks a lot to what you were saying. I wanted perhaps to share a small story around this, and then I'll ask my fellow panelists to perhaps add to this. And this is work that we're doing with a large listed entity here in South Africa, where we were going into a critical conversation about the future of the organization. And while this particular conversation happened just before the crisis kind of erupted in its full form, before the lockdown, there was already a sense of anxiety in the room for a variety of reasons. It would have been very easy for this CEO, a public figure, someone who could have very easily gone into kind of the aspirational leader mode, motivating people, inspiring them, telling them there's a brighter future, that we can overcome this particular crisis, although everyone at the pit of their stomach knew that this is going to be hard. This is not going to be a simple problem. In fact, most of the problems that we help solve are really messy problems in a true sense of the word. And he chose a very different approach, and that was to simply admit that he doesn't know the answer. It was a simple, less than a minute speech, if you could say that, or conversation, where he admitted that he doesn't know, but he trusted the process that we've helped put together to go through this very difficult but important conversation. This particular team came up with a vision that is truly inspiring for their organization, that talks to what their organization could look like by 2040. They have shifted so incredibly during this conversation. And I must say, a lot of it has to do with this particular admission. He gave them essentially the permission to feel safe, to admit as well that they don't know the answer. And this is a group of incredibly talented, capable individuals with incredible teams that work with them. So I hope that this was useful in terms of certainly some of our experience of creating that safe space. But I'm going to turn to you, Amy, and perhaps some of your examples of what, when we start to talk about these critical conversations, certainly in a leadership context, as well as from some having difficult critical conversations about the future that may look very different and have significant implications for our business of today. What helps create that safe space that leaders are really entrusted and play a vital role at creating in their organizations?
I love this question. I'm really glad it was asked. I'm going to pick up where you left off, which was at process. So I think a lot about lining up incentives for safety. As you know, I worked for a long time with military organizations and used to be around national security. So I have had people tell me at lower ranking levels, I've had majors tell me, okay, that's all fine that we're thinking this way and we're learning these skills, but honestly, I cannot say them in a room where we're allegedly thinking perhaps aspirational thoughts about the future of our organization, because the person who's leading that may be my boss in 3 years. So in rigid organizations or ones that are highly hierarchical, I think it's really important, in addition to being a certain kind of leader, the individual leaders of the organizations, to actually make sure that incentive structures are set up so that people have a level of primary safety, and to make that communicated. When people think that their advancement is this way and their honest answer to questions is that way, then you will find them going in the direction of their jobs rather than openness. So I think there's a level of structural safety that can be set up as well.
That's a great one, and I think you're alluding to the close link between the kind of the strategic response, where we're heading, how do we thrive in a future, what is our role as leaders in it, to the some of the organizational aspects that truly thriving in a future that cannot be predictive requires a transformation in ourselves, both as individuals, but certainly in our organizations. And if I think of some of the key organizational processes that are often kind of at fault, that create kind of a layer of cement and make it very difficult for us to respond differently, certainly the kind of the reward incentivization and sometimes even recognition of people becomes certainly one of them. The other one that I wanted to touch on very quickly is the budgeting process. The way we allocate resources. We may sign up to a very inspiring future, to something that could look very differently in terms of how we allocate capital, how we invest, how we manage new businesses, perhaps differently to what our core business looks like. And the budget process often comes in the midst of that and says, well, actually, you will be judged and rewarded or penalized by a different rule book. And in fact, many of the organizations that we've seen and have worked with that are really innovators in this space are ones that have actually lessened their reliance or completely have let go of the annual budget as a management tool. Certainly in these uncertain times, you have to start questioning about what is the role of these processes in the organization, and are they promoting the kind of agility, the kind of creative thinking that you require when no one has a textbook answer, or perhaps they should play a lesser role. I know this is a much bigger conversation. We're not gonna solve it in this particular session, but perhaps some areas to start thinking about. I do see the results of our poll have come in. It seems like about 50% of the audience think that they do have a lot of influence over the future, which is really interesting, particularly when I think of the kind of uncertainty that we are in. So thank you for the audience for participating and sharing from your perspective here. This is wonderful. I wanted to shift the discussion a little bit, and to talk about opportunity, to talk about if we have if not a better set of tools to think through and understand the future and understand some of the decisions that we can even perhaps take today towards advancing towards that future. And going back to the answer of this particular poll question, and understanding that as leaders it is incumbent upon us to do exactly that while dealing with the present. I want to talk a little bit about what emerges from that, what results from that. And often in our work, we find that while there are tasks to be achieved, while there are initiatives to be driven, while there are particular goals that we set to ourselves, some of the best results of organizations that were able to pivot and adapt their way and create a path into the future was actually the ones that was most surprising, the ones that others did not see, that they sometimes did not see themselves. They either did not see the pathway, or they didn't see the potential for it to fundamentally change their business, or sometimes they didn't see the confidence that they had in themselves, the trust that they had in themselves, and actually to take on a different path towards the future from what their current business looked like.